Right, in this perspective lesson we're going to have a look at things that are round and in perspective, such as arches and the arches of bridges, or, as we're going to start with here, buildings that go around a corner on a curve. Now let's say you want to draw a set of buildings that are in a crescent or on a bend. This is how you do it. Let's say we have a building here which we're looking at almost flat on. There's a little bit of perspective in it, but by and large we've got a good view of the building and we can see the windows up here like that, almost directly facing them. Now, to create a sort of curved row of buildings, what you need to do is make the perspective slightly steeper, and the building, assuming it's the same size as this, where you've got the width of that, which is about 1.5 inches, we're going to make this somewhat narrower. So if we draw that like that, you can see the perspective lines are already significantly steeper. Now if we want another building that's almost at 90 degrees to that one, what we then need to do is to draw those perspective lines steeper again, and to make this building here narrower than that. So if we draw that building like that, and let's say we have the end of the roof there, something like that. Now then, let's put the roof on this building here. It's a fairly flat, shallow angle. We can see a little bit of this roof here, but we can't see any of this roof because we're down more or less at ground level and the roof is up here more or less out of sight. But by we'll put another window in there just to keep everything nice and even. If we start putting windows here, you can see that the perspective lines of those windows are much more severe than these windows here, and we can only see about half the width of these windows. Same for the doors, or the door. Again, the line of perspective for the door is quite severe, both top and bottom, but of course it looks right because it's in perspective like that. Now this end building here, because it's in such severe perspective, we may be able only to see the recessed areas of the brickwork. We may not be able to see the windows at all. You can see that we're getting away here with a set of lines, no more than that. Now you can see we've got this curved effect of the street, quite simply by altering the perspective of each of these buildings next to each other. And the way we've altered the perspective is, assuming that these three houses are otherwise identical, is that that house is about 1.5 inches wide, that house there that we've drawn is about 5/8 of an inch wide, and this house here is barely 1/2 inch wide. Now you can see we've got this curved effect of the street, quite simply by altering the perspective of each of these buildings. Now if we wanted to add another building that actually went the opposite way, then all we do is go back to this effect here and just draw a slightly steeper perspective, put in 1 or 2 lines to represent the doors and windows, and then probably just adjust the paving line like that. Right, now imagine we wanted to draw an archway in a building, and maybe we wanted that archway to show us leading through an alleyway into the distance. Well, here's how we do it. I've drawn a square to represent the opening of the arch, apart from the rounded part of the arch itself, but it doesn't have to be square. It could be perhaps that wide, it could be tall and narrow, but for now we'll just do it this way. All I've done is to draw 2 diagonals like that from corner to corner. Now this view assumes that we're going to be looking straight at the centre of the arch. Now then, I'm assuming that the walls are going to be about this thick, and you can see very quickly how we've actually created the front here and the rear wall, or the rear corner of the arch, like that. There's our perspective lines, like that. Now what we've done is to draw a vertical line to the height at which we want the archway to reach. Don't forget all the time that you're doing this for a watercolour painting, so it doesn't necessarily have to be of architectural accuracy as long as it looks reasonably correct. Right, I've had a little play around with the archway and just added a little bit of light and shade. I've also sketched in a bit of an alleyway and another archway in the distance there. But you can see that the top of the arch is in the deepest shadow because the least light is getting there, obviously underneath the archway. But this area here, assuming the sun is coming from top left, this area here is also quite dark in shadow, but not quite as dark as this area because it's getting a bit of reflected light bouncing back off the walls here and there, and this area here is catching a little bit of sunlight. Now the other thing to remember as well is that you can see here that the archway roof is apparently narrower at this point, and that's purely because with you having a relatively high eye line, in this case it's about here where these lines are, then you would see a very much foreshortened part of this area here rather than the area we're looking down on, which would be the bottom of the arches on either side. Now let's look at the same sort of archway, but this time instead of looking straight on like that, we're looking at it from an angle. We're looking at it from the right. Well, in this case we wouldn't see anything like the whole space in the middle of the arch. In fact, we'd see very little of the roof or the underside of the arch, and we'd see nothing of this wall at all. That's how you create the correct perspective for something like an archway or a recess in a building that you're looking at from an oblique angle like that. Which leads us nicely on to bridges, because an archway like this, depending upon its size and shape, is no more than what you would get with the arch of a bridge. Let's assume that there's a river flowing here and that there are the base of the arches like that. Now at the moment it appears from this view that I'm looking straight down the central arch as if I was looking through this archway here. But let's see how easy it is to change that viewpoint. First of all, if I put half an archway in like that, and then importantly a slight angle like that, similar to this one here, let's shade it in there like that, you can see all of a sudden that my viewpoint, instead of being in the middle, has now moved to this side. If I was to draw a line there, I'm only seeing this part of the river beyond the bridge. If I look through here, I'm looking at an even shallower angle, and a shallower angle still with this arch here. Because I've got this angle and I'm no longer looking straight down the middle, I can also see the other side of the bridge, and I've just put a hint of that in and a hint of the other wall, and that's always worthwhile remembering. Right, now you can see I've lowered that riverbank to running just above the bottom of the arches. I've also straightened out the perspective in the bottom of the arches, and that brings me down lower, almost at, not quite, but almost at river level. Right, now I've altered the line of this riverbank so that in this case it's only just visible below the archway, and you can see how instantly my apparent viewpoint has been raised several feet up into the air. And that's achieved so easily just by adjusting the angle of these perspective lines here and here and here.